Allison, Joe Biden, the former vice president, is the clear target among this Democratic field right now. A Monmouth University poll out of South Carolina that was just released this afternoon shows the former vice president in the state of South Carolina with 39% of support overall. If you look at just the African-American electorate, his support stands at 51%. And if you look at this week, earlier, Joe Biden released his own criminal justice reform plan, and Cory Booker, who is sitting at just 2% in that South Carolina poll, came out on the attack just yesterday up in Detroit at an NAACP presidential forum, saying that Joe Biden's plan was not, quote, bold enough. He said it was unacceptable for somebody who was, quote, one of the architects of mass incarceration. Of course, Joe Biden, back when he was in the Senate representing the state of Delaware back in 1994, was a strong advocate in the passage of that 1994 crime bill. But the former vice president says that Cory Booker is wrong in his analysis of his record. And a deputy campaign manager for Biden's campaign said that Cory Booker's accusations against Joe Biden were absurd, saying that perhaps the former Newark mayor should look at his own record. Back when he was the mayor of Newark, there was a DOJ investigation into the Newark Police Department, and also that police department engaged in a stop and frisk policy that Joe Biden says should be called into question. This is the type of conversation. These are detailed, nuanced conversations about criminal justice reform that are taking place right now. But you saw what happened 1 month ago. It was Kamala Harris, the senator out of California, who first took those shots at the former vice president over his record when it came to busing and the desegregation of schools. Joe Biden said yesterday at a fundraiser without cameras on, he said that he planned to not be, quote, as polite in this next debate next week in Detroit, saying that he thought that Kamala Harris was a friend. Of course, these poll numbers would indicate that Joe Biden will be that target as this large Democratic field tries to chip away at his support, not only overall, but among that African-American base. I should note that we've talked to a great number of voters across the country, including here in Indianapolis just this morning. And there was one gentleman, Eric Goody, out of Houston, who I talked to, an older African-American voter. And he told me that right now he plans to support Joe Biden. He said that one's record should be looked at in the totality of their career and where they stand right now. And he said that he believes Joe Biden has made progress, and it's not even fair to look at his support of that 1994 crime bill as evidence or reason to not back him now. He said that people like himself who are a little bit older, they learn about their past position and it's how they develop and how they grow. To note, there's other younger voters, younger African-American voters, that say that one's record should be looked at in a totality and that other candidates like Kamala Harris should be given the attention because they are more forward-thinking. And as this Democratic primary goes on, you'll continue to see those distinctions made on that debate stage, very well likely just this next week over in Detroit. Allison?
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.